Traffic jams were unheard of just a few years ago when Mr. Ho drove into work in the center of Beijing. In China's dawning age of consumerism, 3,000 new cars and their damaging emissions hit this city's streets every day. Beijing's bikes have to fight to stay on the roads. Mr. Ho is making the most of the new opportunities. He's quite the local bigwig. As well as running a textile company and a restaurant, he's also president of the city's Chamber of Commerce. At the weekends, he and his friends choose to spend yet more time with their cars.
它主要呢就是为什么叫汽车俱乐部呢？就是大家
We drive our cars to keep ourselves calm and on an even keel. Our club organises weekend activities so small and medium-sized company bosses can relax together. It means we'll work better together the following week.
1 in 4 families in China now owns a car. Since China let in market forces, its politicians know they must keep delivering economic prosperity to stay in power.
这个目的达到一什么？就是适者生存。
In the present economic climate, it's down to the survival of the fittest. You really have to work yourself to get what you want in life. It's not good for lazy people. They can't live in villas, they can't own a family car, they can't enjoy a better standard of living. In Chinese society now, we need to work for ourselves if we want to get rich.
The whole city hopes to get rich as the Olympics come to Beijing in 3 years' time. China wants to be seen as a vibrant, go-ahead nation. It's building modern flats with all the energy-guzzling domestic appliances that implies, tearing down the Hutong courtyard homes of Beijing's poorest, eager to banish their Dickensian alleyways. All this expansion is fueled by coal, and it's not just feeding the promise of a new way of life here. Coal has long been at the heart of people's lives. 78-year-old Mrs. Meng takes delivery of the coal that heats her home.
Coal is cheaper, and in these small houses, people prefer to burn coal.
30 pence a day buys the honeycombed briquettes that fuel her stove.
I'm old now. Using coal is really difficult for me, especially as my children aren't around to help.
Over the past 2 decades, China has put economic growth above all else. And with 200 million Chinese still living on less than $1 a day, relieving poverty remains vital. Coal offers the way out. As the demand for power grows, for the time being, this means one thing: more emissions of climate-changing gases. For the Chinese government's economic advisors, the choices are clear.
When you have many problems, you have to prioritize the problems, which one you have to solve first. And then when you have poverty, and then you have to tackle poverty first.
A coal truck stop just north of Beijing. We ran into this convoy, 200 to 300 lorries strong. One of its number had broken down. These men drive the length and breadth of this vast country to keep the nation's lifeblood flowing. Nearly 80% of China's electricity comes from coal. That's twice the average worldwide. But supplying that energy comes at a cost. 214 miners lost their lives in an accident on the day we arrived in China. The safety record's appalling. Officially, 6,000 were killed in China's coal mines just last year. That's 20 a day, with methane gas explosions behind most accidents. Methane's not just a safety hazard, it's also a greenhouse gas, 20 times as damaging as carbon dioxide. Most of the accidents happen in small private mines, dotted across the landscape as we drove through China's coal-rich Shaanxi province. Jumpy local officials prevented us from filming here. Such was their anxiety over what we might see. Mr. Meng has been a miner for 20 years. He lives here with his wife and 2 teenage sons and earns about £300 a month, twice the average pay of a Chinese miner. This mine is being held up as a role model because it's trying to cut down the powerful greenhouse gas it emits. Here at one of China's largest and most modern coal mines in Shaanxi province, they expect to produce 10 million tons of coal before the year's out. That's enough to keep the Republic of Ireland in electricity for a whole year. This is the first mine in China to tackle the issue of greenhouse gases by capturing the methane that's released when the coal is mined. But once this coal is burnt to produce heat and power, it will release all its damaging carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
那天的云是否都已料到，所以脚步才轻巧。
To reach the coal, the miners travel half a kilometre down a steep incline on individual button lids. Then it's a 6-kilometre journey by truck to reach the coal face itself. An equivalent-sized mine in Europe or America would use a workforce of around 800. Here, people are cheap, with 3,000 on the payroll. Safety officials constantly check the methane content of the air. The frantic sounds you can hear warn that the conveyor belt's about to start, not of an impending explosion. Massive hydraulic rams support the seam as the coal is mined by machine. The methane that's released is pumped to the surface, where it was once sent straight into the atmosphere. Now it's diverted into a small gas-fired power station. The methane capturing scheme generates paper credits that the mine group has sold to the World Bank for $20 million. As well as the extra money, the scheme should make the mine safer, with less methane around. It's a small first step to making coal less damaging to the environment. The head of the mining group wants others to take a bigger share of the task of cleaning up the planet.
We are a country with a lot of coal, very little oil and very little gas. The development of coal is the basis of the development of the country. There is no way we can replace our production of coal or use alternative sources of energy to totally replace it. Because the US and some Western governments don't abide by the Kyoto Protocol, they are not willing to reduce their carbon emissions. We feel very annoyed about that.
But the scale of China's own entangled history with coal is overwhelming. Across northern China, small mines have disturbed coal seams and created unstoppable fires. Together, these let off a total amount of carbon dioxide each year equal to all the cars in the US. It's in China's own interest to limit its climate-changing emissions. It's already feeling the effects. Central Asia is drying out, a result of global warming, and it's going to get worse. Here around the Great Wall, they're planting trees to turn around this arid landscape. It's a sign of the change of heart since Mao's damaging dictum that man should conquer nature, whatever the cost, a philosophy that's left China uniquely vulnerable. Deserts make up a quarter of China's land, mostly in the north, and they're growing by several thousands of kilometres squared every year. The problem started with decades of overgrazing and poor use of land, creating infertile soil and erosion, and the blinding red sandstorms that plague Beijing. Sand has travelled here from Inner Mongolia, over 400 kilometres away.
It's made of sand that has flown here in the wind and has created a piece of land in the form of a desert. So we call it the desert from the sky.
Replanting only started in the last 10 years. There's a lot to catch up on. The economic impact of all this is huge.
Desertification causes a reduction in our natural resources and it destroys our quality of life. People's living space is ever decreasing. It affects farming, crop production and transport. It affects people's lives.
Chronic drought is not unique to northern China. Its coastal cities are also desperately short of water. 3/4 of China's economic wealth is based in these cities. 20 years ago, there was only one skyscraper here in Shanghai that was over 100 meters high. Now there are more than 300. But thirst for water to build these skyscrapers, and then the sheer weight they place on the shifting soil, has meant the city is literally sinking. 15 years ago, the whole of the area behind me was marshland, and that's the problem. Shanghai, like all of China's eastern coastal cities, is built on a river delta and is desperately vulnerable to flood. And the city's like a magnet. The bigger it gets, the more people it needs and the more energy it consumes, feeding its own destruction by making the sea level rises due to global warming all the more likely. On the opposite bank of the river that runs through Shanghai is the Bunt colonial waterfront. It may look like a boulevard, but its original purpose was as a flood defence. It's constantly being rebuilt to cope, most recently last year, and now there are plans for a massive dam on this river to help protect the city from rising sea levels.
We're assuming in the next 50 years the sea level might be 50 centimeters higher than the present sea level. That is a huge concern for people living here. Plus, we have 16 or 17 million people living here, so we need fresh water. If the fresh water is really affected by the salt water invasion, so the whole city will collapse.
Not only is Shanghai sinking, it's also vulnerable to surge tides, like this tidal bore on the Hangzhou Creek south of the city. In a warming world, scientists expect our oceans to expand and the polar ice caps to melt. We asked researchers to work out the likely impact on Shanghai. In their worst-case scenario, the rise in sea levels the officials are expecting could hit sooner than predicted, in just 20 years, not 50. Armies of new homes are going up right across the Shanghai hinterlands, with plans for 11 satellite cities in the next 5 years, some with more than 1 million people. It's an inevitable and endless cycle of energy-guzzling growth, on the very land at risk from flood from rising sea levels. And in Beijing, the pattern's the same. New homes for the workers needed to keep these cities growing. There are some local attempts at improving the environment. This steel factory shifting its coking plant out of the city, so air quality might improve in time for the Olympics. But it'll take more than just moving the coal plants out of sight. It's more fundamental change that's needed. The coal-based economy here is entrenched, and there are plans for 500 more coal-burning power stations. But if climate-changing gases are to be kept at a safe level, it matters not just here, but to the rest of the world, that China ends its dependence on coal. What China does now will decide how much damage it causes in the world's atmosphere. If it builds the planned coal-fired power stations, it will push carbon dioxide concentrations right up to the 400 parts per million level, at which scientists expect dangerous climate change. Nuclear power may be one answer. We were allowed into a new type of reactor, pioneered here, which went live just after our visit. It uses tens of thousands of small spheres of nuclear fuel and is supposed to be ultra-safe. One of the Chinese government's energy advisors told us nuclear power could meet at least 20% of China's energy needs, eventually.
We need a new model of development. That means high-level living standards with lower emission per capita. If we can find such a model, China will follow that.
Zhou Dadi wants Western governments to offer technology partnerships that are not just about making a fast buck, but technical solutions that allow China to burn coal without destroying the planet. To expect China to slow its growth is out of the question, but it's in everybody's interest that China finds new ways to use energy from coal without tipping us all into a climate-changed world.